And here's the deal, folks. I think most of you can see things over there, but if you want to see something a little bit more up close, feel free to come over here and stand beside me and take a look at the things, but I'll try to describe the pieces. Now, when it comes to identifying most of the center-handled servers, now in most of the catalogs they call them trays, or serving trays. But we call them handled servers because most of them do have a handle. You've probably, if you've been in any antique mall or place that has glass, you will see some center handled servers that just have a post. They don't really have a handle, it's just a post there. And so that would be a center post server, I guess, in that aspect. Now, some of the details. I'm going to talk about some of the details of how you identify some of these different handles on these servers to identify the different makers. I'll ask you as the audience, where can you get that information? On the American Iridescent Stretch Glass book, in the back are line illustrations of the common looped and shovel-handled servers so that you can identify those. Obviously, certain ones, like the heart-handled ones, are pretty easy to identify, but the others that use what we just call shovels or loops can be a little bit troublesome and more worrisome on how to identify them. I'm going to start over here. Also, there are two basic types of trays, and as soon as I say there's two basic types of trays, we will see some exceptions to that. But the two types are what we generally consider to be the sandwich tray. The sandwich tray usually just has a straight side to it. And then there's the fruit tray, and the fruit tray typically has the sides raised up. So obviously if you put apples in here, they're not going to roll off of that very easily. But the other trays, anything that's round would roll off of that tray pretty easily. So they made these fruit trays in here. We'll take a look some other ones that I've sort of joked that must be marble trays to keep little tiny round things from going on them where they really have a rim rolled around. Now the first ones I'm going to start with here are the Northwood and Company. Northwood made what we call a shovel handle. That means that it's flat on the top here. To me, the easiest thing to identify with the Northwood is it virtually has no stem to that shovel handle. And so if you see a shovel handled server and it looks like it just almost goes straight into the base, that's going to be a Northwood one. And of course, it comes in the common Northwood colors, topaz, blue, russet, and there are a few of them out there in marigold, and what we would call marigold. And so a few of those are around. Most of them are in the blue and topaz, and there's a few of them out there in the russets. Now, Cal brought in the fruit server. Probably the toughest shape to get in all the Northwoods are the fruit shape. I see that very rarely in their servers. The next one, we're going to go into a couple of the what we might consider to be the more minor producers, and the first one is Jeanette. Now, I've always been interested in the servers. When you see Jeanette bowls, especially those big 10 to 12 inch bowls, when you look at that gold iridescence in there, it just pops. But I've yet to find a center handled server that does the same thing. Now, I find it kind of interesting. Jeanette made very little stretched glass, but they actually made two servers. And both of the servers are shovel handled. In other words, they're flat topped, have a stem on them. One of them has a very narrow shovel handle and typically has a star embossed in the base of it. And I hate to say this has got to be some of the ugliest iridescence. It's just kind of a muddy brown color. And you see other Jeanette pieces, gee, if that was gold, it would be golden. But most of the ones that I see are not really all that great. And they only iridized. You now know from seeing the video this morning, you'll notice that many center handled servers may only be iridized on one side. So I'll ask you, if this is iridized on the underside, what part of that was iridized when they sprayed the dope on it? it would be the inside of the bell. Okay, they didn't spray the outside, they only sprayed on the inside of that bell and then folded it down. The other one is really difficult to identify. It's got a fairly small shovel shape on it, a nice stem with a little ring running around here. And the problem with this is that it looks a little bit like the Imperial, but the Imperial doesn't have this little ring down here. So that will separate it off from the Imperial. We also have Central Glass, made a shovel handled, and you can see it's it does, when you get them side by side, they don't look anything alike, but I'm telling you, when it's just on a shelf, it may be a little bit difficult to see. But again, this one does not have the little ring at where the stem joins into the base. So shovel handle, fairly small, nice stem, ring at the base. That's going to be another Jeanette. And this one I really like. And when I first saw this, Barry Wiggins was telling us, he was the one that worked out all these. I said, boy, that looks like Lancaster Aztec to me, the really dark marigold. And he said, nope, they just doped it really well, but that happens to be a Jeanette. Now, probably one of the easier ones to identify is the Lancaster. They also made a shovel-handled server, but boy, is it clunky. You can see that handle is really big and thick, has a fairly small stem, and then a little ring where the stem meets the base on this. They made, typically, the two most common types is they made their Aztec, that's their name for their dark marigold, and they also made a white lustry, which is just what we would call pearl or white stretch glass. But Tom and Sandy were nice enough to bring in the one I've been lusting for a long time. You probably know that Lancaster did these painted enamel flowers on a lot of their pieces. And I think this may be about the only server that I've seen. I knew there had to be a server with those flowers on it, and Tom and Sandy were kind enough to bring it in. So if you see any of them with the flowers on it, again, that very typical Lancaster flowers, you automatically will know what you're dealing with. Any questions? Yeah, Cal?
On the Lancaster servers in the book, it shows two servers with slightly different dimensions. Are there in fact two servers, or is it one server that just came out?
Yeah, the question is that actually if you look at this one looks a little bit smaller than this, and I think that's probably related to what George Fenton mentioned this morning, that depending on the thickness of that glass, when you fold it down, one's going to be a little bit more narrow. But I've compared all the handles. I've not seen a difference in the handles at all. So my feeling is they came out of the same mold. No. Okay, any other questions? All right, our next group is going to be U.S. glass. And frankly, U.S. glass only made two shapes, but boy, did they use a wide range of colors and decorations on them. We'll start out first by describing the handle. Now, what's wrong with that shovel? It's kind of flat on top, okay? So if you see a shovel-handled server that's actually a little rounded at the top, as opposed to the Fenton, which is a true loop handle in there, you're dealing with U.S. glass. The other thing is when I spot a U.S. glass server, they're almost always smaller than all the other servers. So if you kind of take a look at that, here would be a sort of a standard size server, and there's a U.S. glass server. You can see it's obviously much smaller in size. Now, I'll start out, here's their, what we would call white or crystal. What I want you to notice, I've never seen a U.S. glass handled server with a rolled rim up. However, they did make many of them that this rim is raised up. So my feeling is this is the equivalent of the fruit bowl, and this would be the normal tray that's more flattened down. Now there's some little details that you might miss. Obviously this one's a little bit harder to miss, but Remember that U.S. Glass often used enamel decoration on their pieces. And I apologize to Cal. I had him bring his green enamel one because I thought I had a blue enamel one. But when I got it out of the box, I thought, uh-oh, mine's green also. So now that's why we have two of the green enamel handled servers here. But they are slightly different. One's a little bit more raised than the other one. But my feeling is those are generally the servers. Quite a few years ago, I saw this in a cabinet, and I go, something's wrong with that one. And if you take a look at it, it's kind of a muddy marigold in this. And I've seen some other pieces that U.S. Glass made that have that same kind of a muddy marigold on it. So either they had a bad dope mix that day, or something else was going on, but it is slightly different. Here's another crystal server, but notice what they did on this. They applied this overall enamel back to this. Now remember, there are two primary enamel designs that U.S. Glass made. One of them is Cumula, and that's this. And again, I've always wondered, why do they call this Cumula? Because it has the white clouds but a green background. I would have thought it would be a blue background, but all of them have the green background. There's a whole series of items with this. And the other one is called Pomona, which usually comes in a yellow or purple ground with a leaf design on it. And I've yet to see a handled server that has Pomona, though we've seen other pieces that have that Pomona design. Blues in U.S. Glass. For those of you that have a fairly decent collection of U.S. Glass, you know that they made an aquamarine. We see vases and bowls in this sort of a light blue. And actually, if you get this up to the Fenton aquamarine, it's pretty close to it. And they also made what would consider to be a sort of a celeste blue color. Thanks, Cal. Topaz. Now, if you get a chance, you really ought to come up and take a look at this one. Actually, this is mine. I'll pass it around. Look at the evenness of the stretch effect on that. It's just amazing that the little crackle lines are all pretty much the same distance. And I've seen a fair number of the U.S. servers that are that way. What would you call that one? Olive green, okay. And again, we've seen some 314 pieces in this olive green color, so we know that there are other pieces in this olive green, but they made a handled server out of that.
Hey, is that fluorescent?
Pardon?
Is that fluorescent?
It's easy to tell. Yes, it does. Now, I'm glad you asked that. We checked it out earlier, and it doesn't fluoresce nearly as strongly as a true topaz. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a weak fluorescence. There's obviously some uranium in that, but it's not. They've got something else in it also to give it that olive green color. And then a wisteria. A nice purple in there. Excuse me. Okay. External rays, paired rays with points. What's the line? This is 310. And what are the other colors that we find 310 in? We find them in blue and topaz. But when it comes to the handled servers, I've only found them in the pink and green. So it's probably goes back to our morning discussion. Why did they make some colors and not other colors? It may have been that was just what they had in the glass tanks at the day that they were making these handled servers. Any questions on the U.S. glass pieces? Okay. Our next ones are going to be the diamond glass, and I'm going to pick the easy one to do first. The easy one is the heart-handled one. Okay. And so if you see this, and what I want you to take a look at is the handle on this, the heart is round in here. When you take a look at the Imperial heart handle, it has faceted sides to that handle. So if it's a completely round heart handle, notice that the heart comes in, there's a little ring where the heart joins into the stem in there. And so that would typically be the diamond. As far as I have seen, I've only seen blue and green in those, but guess what showed up in the collection? I think this is what we're having for the display with the club. And as you can see, this is a marigold. And typical of many of the company's marigolds, as far as I'm concerned, Imperial is the only one that really truly stretched a lot of their marigold. If you take a look at Grecian gold, you really have to have a good imagination to say, well, that's got stretch. Now, Diamond also made a shovel handle, okay? But do you notice anything unusual about that shovel handle? It's got a really long stem in here, fairly wide, really long stem. Also has a little ring where it joins down in the base of that. And again, the only two colors that we've seen in this, green and blue. I've heard somebody said that there's a pearl one of these out there, but I've yet to see it. I've not been able to see that. Okay, our last one before we get into the two big makers of handled servers, and that's going to be Fenton and Imperial, is Central. And we've already talked about the Central. The Central has a shovel handle again, fairly short stem, but no definite ring down here where that stem joins into the base of it. This is the only one that I really know of that has the stretch iridescence on it. And obviously, Central gave this or sold this as a blank to a decorating company. It has a beautiful floral etched design on the side of it with some gold paint or applique made to that. Now, Tom, I'm going to make you my runner. Will you go get your plate? Tom and Sandy brought in another handled server, which, being marigold, as shiny as can be, okay? But when we looked at it, the handles are identical. So this is again, another Central center handled server. However, if you'll notice that this is an opalescent glass in here, and actually Central made a whole series of candlesticks and bowls with the same effect. Very shiny marigold with that opalescent effect on it. And those items are fairly obtainable, but I think that's the only center handled server I've seen with that effect. So yeah, we'll leave it here for you folks to take a look at later on. Okay, let's move into the Fenton. I'm going to start with the little miscellaneous items. There's center handled servers. The first thing is the number 318s. The 318s are Butterball trays. These are the little 6-inch, 7-inch diameter trays. They also have a shovel handle, but what's unique about that shovel? It's kind of curved at the top. It's not straight across there. And as far as I know, none of the other companies made any small servers like this. So if you find a small server like that, and you can see it's in quite a variety of colors here. We've got the topaz, Grecian gold, the Florentine green, velvet rose, and the celeste blue. I do know that there's a Persian pearl one out there. And I wouldn't doubt it. I would think that there's got to be a tangerine one out there also. But I don't have that here. Also, they made another little center handled server. This doesn't have a hole in it. It just has a stem and a ball on it. And this is the little Fenton lemon trays. And again, we've got it in the most common colors here. The topaz and Florentine green are fairly obtainable. That's followed probably by the Celeste Blue and the Velva Rose. And I do know, I think Cal's got a Tangerine one of these. And I've heard that there's a Wisteria one of these out there somewhere. So pretty much all of the common colors that Fenton used in Stretch, they made the little lemon servers. Next we moved to the 318 Butterball ovals. And in this particular case, as you can see, it's the handle is exactly the same. So they use the same handle. If George was here, how they made this oval is that they used a different retaining ring at the top. And in the retaining ring at the top, remember that this would have been as a bell upside down with a loop in it. Well, that retaining ring would have had two sides that went in. So when the glass was squished out, it was all the way to the edge on one and shorter on the other. When they turn it around, it makes an oval shape, okay? So on this one, it was the retaining ring at the top of that mold that made the difference in there. These are tough to find in any color. And again, I appreciate, let's see, this one's mine, but Cal brought in a pink one, and the beauty of this one has this really delicate raised enamel decoration in here. If you feel of this, I don't rub it, I just sort of touch it, has a very heavy texture in there. And to me, I don't know why they made it that way, because if you put too many items in there, it'd probably rubble them off, so these may have been more for display than anything else. And then, Tom and Sandy brought in the Tangerine one that's got exactly the same floral decoration in it. Pretty neat. So when I see that with a couple of different colors, my feeling is this is probably a factory decoration and more likely not a secondary decorating company that did that. My next one are the 317s. Now, notice that there are two shapes of the 317s. The most common one is the round server, like this. Also notice that Fenton, to me, is one of the easiest ones to identify because they made a loop handle. It's completely rounded at the top. It's not flattened or shortened down at the top. Also, there's no ring in here. The stem comes in, attaches just to a round part of the base and goes on into the base. This comes, the most common size was the round one, but they also apparently used a different retaining ring and made an oval shape. The oval shapes are the tough ones to get. We were lucky here to get a blue example, a Velva Rose example, and a Tangerine example. And some of these, my feeling is, what would you call that one? I would say that's probably a fruit bowl, the way that it's pulled up a little bit more than the rest of these. Okay, let's go into the regular 317 servers in the round shape. And I think we've got pretty much most of the common colors that you would expect to find these in. Again, Celeste Blue, Velva Rose, and the Florentine Green are the most common colors. But let me also draw your eye over here. The reason why we put this is Persian Pearl that we put on the black. So pearl is another fairly common color that you can get these in. Now, let's go into some of the differences. Here's two pinks. That's probably the sandwich tray. I'd say that's probably the fruit tray. Okay? I think the finisher got a little excited on that one, okay? And so we see it's pulled up a little bit more. And like I said, if you've got cheese balls, this would be the great one. You can't dump them out of there. But this is the tough one to find, the one that has a truly cupped in rim. And if anybody finds one and wants to sell it or tell me where it is, I don't have one of these yet. But you can see we got beautiful examples in the Celeste Blue topaz, and the Persian pearl. We got examples of those. Also, you'll find that both Northwood and Fenton's handled servers occasionally will have etch around the rim with the gold trim. Remember that this was not done by either Northwood or Fenton, especially when you find the same etching on the or etched design on two different manufacturers. That's telling me that it was a secondary decorating company. This one's easy to identify. You can see the little curtain loops on this, is commonly called curtain, and this was made by the Lotus Decorating Company. And so again, if you find them in the original color, they're really nice. They've got the gold trim, but they also put a little gold flower on the top of the handle. But unfortunately, that's where you grab a hold of it with your fingers, and that rubs that gold off fairly easily. Any questions on the Fentons over here? I'm going to fit, yeah, Cal?
Who was it that used to call the one with the cup edge a nut server? Because I've heard people refer to it as a nut server.
The question is who called the cupped one as nut servers? I have no idea. Actually, that's the first time I've heard it as a nut server. But that would make sense. If you put peanuts in there, they're not going to roll out of there pretty easily. So, it's kind of, I go back to Gary Singcar trying to figure out where the name Jewels come from, and then we finally found out, well, Imperial used that name at one time, and my feeling is that name may have come to us, and Fenton may have called them nut servers at one time. Okay, I'm going to shift on over to this other table to finish off the Fenton, and we're going to go over here and do the Dolphin handled servers. George, if you were here this morning, George was gracious enough to come in and talk about how these were made. Basically, there's two different sizes of these. There's the standard tray with a dolphin on it, and then there's also a Butterball with a dolphin handle. Most of these that I see sort of are halfway between a tray and halfway between a serving dish, but they have the rim sort of folded up, which I think makes all the sense in the world. If you're going to put Butterballs in there, they're going to roll off unless you've got a rim to retain them. When it comes to the large servers, there's two forms of that also. There's the diamond optic, and if I hold this up, I think you can see the diamond optics in that. Now, where did those diamonds come from? That was from the plunger. So they had a separate plunger that they used for that, as opposed to the ones the mold that we had here this morning that had a plain plunger. And as Cal pointed out this morning, plain ones are tough to find, okay? You can often find the diamond optic ones, and of course people are going to charge a premium for them, but they're really tough to find. Now let me point out some important things about these center handled servers. And you're going to need to know this if you want to buy one of these things, okay? Remember that when this was made, the gather was applied here, the plunger went down, and so it shoved that hot molten glass in here around the tail, and the glass had to again meet right here, okay? And if you get these just right, they almost all look like they have a crack right there. It's not a crack. It's a glass junction. It's where the two pieces of glass joined in there. But if you're in negotiation with a dealer who doesn't know that, it's got a cracked tail. You ought to give me a better price for that, okay? I would never do that, okay?
You might also point out that when you're buying any of the Dolphin pieces, you've got to look at the bottom lip.
Yes.
The bottom lip is where the chip always is. And in fact, there's some folks, I think, who actually believe that
they came that way.
wasn't exactly perfect on the bottom.
Yeah.
See it misformed so many times.
Yeah.
You can tell if the iridescence is gone,
Yeah.
it's a chip.
One of the things that I wanted to point out that George talked about this morning is that in that mold, when it's made as a bell upside down, there is a ring in the bottom of this that is supposed to set on. So you can actually see this definite little ring right in there. Unfortunately, what was interesting is when they remade these the aquamarine opalescent pieces, they often made them where it set on this outside rim and not that ring. And I remember going into the factory and purchasing one of these, and this was in the seconds. And I asked the lady, why is it in the seconds? And she said, well, they didn't make the bottom right. And I go, oh, really? As far as I'm concerned, this one, they made the bottom right. Their first were ones that actually set on this outside rim, not on the ring. So I was just glad to get one that, yeah, Rascal wants to come off of there. It's like all labels. They will stay on when you don't want them to, and they won't stick when you want them to. Okay, that's all I need to hurry up here a little bit. That's all the Fenton handled servers. Now let's go to the Imperial. The Imperial, what shape's the handle? Okay, yeah, that's shovel or spade handles. Flat as can be on the top. Notice that here, there's a real difference in this one. If you check the flatness on here and it comes down, there are 6 flat sides. Those 6 flat sides go all the way down into the ring of the base. Okay, so that's how you can always tell the Imperial ones is that the flat sides of the handle go all the way down into the base. They don't stop and then turn round and go into the base like all the rest of them. So that makes them pretty easy to identify. The other thing that I want you to notice is in many of these, if you hold them correctly, what you'll often find is what looks like a little crack up here in the handle. What is it? It's a junction seam, okay? Because again, when that hot glass went in here, some of the glass went this direction, some of the glass went that direction. They cooled off a little bit, and they had to meet somewhere. And that junction line can be anywhere on this flat, but it will usually be there. If you get the light just right, it will appear as maybe a crack in there, but it's not. It's a junction line for that, okay? Now, Imperial was, to me, one of the more precise makers of their handled servers. They made the typical sandwich tray, and they made the fruit trays, and they're usually very consistent. Especially the fruit trays have this nice rounded size to them and are pulled up. Probably the one that, and of course, Tom brought one that doesn't fit that. This is probably the one aberrant fruit bowl that is it doesn't come out and go up. It starts the curve at the very base and goes up, and that's a little bit different shape. But I'm quite sure they probably sold that as a fruit bowl. Now we're starting out. I guess the first thing, as far as we know, Imperial really only made 3 different colors in their handled servers. They made the, do you know what the marigold was called? I'll start you out. Rose, ice, okay. So they made a rose ice. What was their white? Iris, ice, okay. And what was their smoke color? Blue ice, okay? And so those are the 3. We've never seen a green ice, which would be the teal color, or any of the other colors. And basically, as far as I can tell, all of their handled servers, except when we get to the heart handles, were made with crystal glass, and it just depended on the iridescence that they applied to it that gave it the different colors. I'll give you some first examples again, and you're going to see, like any iridized pieces, the dope fairy hit this one a lot more than this one. You can see this one has almost an icy white effect to it, and this one's kind of clear, but still has some good iridescence on that. This would be the sandwich server, and this would be the fruit server. Both the same, but one turned up, one flat. Now, I'm going to show you some cuttings. Remember that Imperial had a very large decorating shop, and they were known for their cuttings. They made hundreds of different styles of cuttings. I remember looking in one of the book, I think there was a cutting number 300 something. So they made a whole bunch of it. A lot of those cutting numbers were actually in the Depression era. They were after the stretch era. Most of the cutting numbers that we found have generally been in the 100 or less in the number. The other problem is Gary's looked for all through the Imperial catalogs that are at the Imperial Museum and so forth. Many of the cuttings that we see on these plates we don't have a name for, or at least a number for. So I'm going to give you some of them to start with, and I'm going to pick up some of the other ones that will be easier to see. But I wanted you to see this one first. This one's got a cutting on it, and as far as I can tell, this is the only one that I've ever seen with this cutting. I've dubbed this one Rosebud. And the reason for that, they did make a rose flower, but this one, if you take a look at it, it actually has the little petals down at the bottom that would be the stipules on the flower, and some rays at the top of it. So to me, it's a little more closed. That's why I've sort of dubbed this one Rosebud. This one's also unusual in that almost none of the handled servers that I see have any marginal decoration. And this one has little oval cuts all the way around. A lot of it. If Fenton had to make this today in a decorating company, can you imagine the amount of money that would be caused to have a decorator do that? But very commonly find these handled servers for $100 or less. Yeah. Pardon? You just said. Oh, I may have said Fenton. I'm sorry. Yes. Good catch. I meant Imperial, yes. Okay. Okay, our next one, we don't know the number of this. There's a couple of fairly similar designs, but I've dubbed this one Chrysanthemum, or just mum for short. Has very large petals in the flower and three little stamens in it, and a nice leaf spray on that one. Again, this is you can find this both in the sandwich tray and the fruit tray. The other fairly common floral design I've named fuchsia. And the reason for that is Renee loves fuchsia flowers, and boy does that look like a fuchsia flower to me. The sort of short petals, all the same length, and very long stamens sticking out from the underside of that. Okay. Now this is this is one pattern that we know the number. This is the number 30. Get that around. But do you notice anything different about them? They both have the flowers with the little paired balls in between them. But if you'll notice, the flowers are two different sizes, and the balls are actually two different sizes. And this is fairly consistent. We've seen several pieces of both flowers. So my feeling is this was one cutter, And this was another cutter that looked at the pattern and duplicated the pattern, but one cutter made them small and the other cutter made them larger than that. I'm sure they're still number 30s. This is another design that we know. This is cutting number 12. And obviously most of the collectors call it balloons. I think that makes all the sense in the world. These two are different. I'm not going to ask you to do it. This has 26 balloons. This has 27 balloons. Most of them have 27 balloons. I know of only 2 that have the 26 balloons. But again, I suspect it was just the cutter of that day was just chunk, chunk, chunk making the balloons. It was, that's close enough in there. But yeah, I have to chuckle when I say that because I always roll my eyes when our Carnival friends say, well, it's got 2 eyes on the bee, or the one feather's turned this way and another feather's turned that way. Yeah, different molds and so forth. But here I am telling you the difference in number of balloons in the cuttings of the Imperial servers. I'm sure they were still considered number 12s. Some other designs that we don't know the number of the cutting. One I think is fairly easy. A lot of people just call it triangle. I would say maybe floral and triangle because it does have a flower. Very, very nice triangular design in there. What I find is interesting is every one of these that I picked up, it usually has the flat on one side directly at 90 degrees to the handle. So whenever the cutter started, they probably locked it in with the handle setting one direction, and then they turned it the other 3 to get those. The other one is this. As an entomologist, this really grates my soul. This is often called butterfly and basket weave. Now, as an entomologist, that is not a butterfly. That's a moth. But I suspect moth and basket weave doesn't sound as neat as the others. But this, again, the one with the sort of insect cutting on here is a tough one to get. And the triangles also fairly tough to get. Another one that's kind of difficult to get is what I call a daisy chain, a series of daisies around with leaves on the inside of them. This one is not a common one. Of the florals, go back, it's the chrysanthemum and the fuchsia are generally the most common of the floral cuttings that you'll find. Now we're down to getting close to the last 3 of the cuttings for Imperial. We don't know the actual number for these, but I call these dahlia stem. And this is the first one that I got. And then I saw that one in the store and said, something's wrong with that. What's wrong with it? What's different about it?
The stems are going.
Yeah, the flower is facing out on the smoke one here, and the flower is facing in on here. The leaves are pretty much the same. Okay, I've only seen one of these. I know of several of these, and my feeling is The cutter must have had a few too many drinks the night before on this one and forgot which direction the flower went on those. And the last one, we know the cutting on this one. This exact cutting is in the catalogs on some vases. And I call it forget-me-not chain because the flowers remind me a little forget-me-not flowers in that. So that's why I suspect somebody else may prefer another name, but that's kind of what I've given it. This is the last cutting that I've got. I think I have pretty much all the cuttings now that are pretty well known. But and it was interesting on Hooked on Carnival when I posted this. Another lady said, "Hey, I've got one of those." So there are other ones out there. Oh, and by the way, all of these shovel-handled servers were in the Imperial line were number 664, and then they may have had other treatments and so forth. This is the 725 handled server. And again, this is Imperial's. It's an octagonal shape. When it pulls up, it actually, you can see that it looks like a stop sign from that, but if you look at it from the side, it looks like it's round in there. These have the heart handle, but again, if you take a look at the facets on the heart handle, they go all the way down into the base. Even though there's a little bulge right there at the base, they still have those panels in the base. So again, very Imperialist. Oh, I love this one. If you get the light on this, it just reflects purples and pinks like mad. Again, these were made in the sandwich tray and the fruit server. This usually comes either in crystal or in pink. And the pink usually has a marigold iridescence to it. And I'm not going to bother you, it can come with several kinds of gold decorations on them. There's a couple of floral decorations. I think, Tim, you picked up another floral decoration that's similar on a bowl, but it is slightly different. So if you take a look at this one, this looks almost like some rosebuds in here and a gold decoration. So I have a feeling there may be a center-handled server that would have this same gold decoration on it. Another fairly common decoration that Imperial used on some of their 725 and 727 lines. Those were the octagonal lands. The 725 is without little handles on the end of it when they're bowls, and the 727s are the ones with the little handles on the side of them. But you'll often find the bowls and other things with this decal. This is actually a floral decal that was applied to that. And so be very careful with these. You can rub that off if you try to clean it too aggressively on those. But these are nice ones. They've got the decals with some gold trim. Again, in the sandwich and fruit. Okay, here's the last of my servers. I'll get to the candlestick bowls as the very last, but when it comes to the servers, and there's several things that I want to point out with these. The first one, what color is that? It's a very light aquamarine. And you probably say, yeah, they probably screwed up the tank that day, or they got the end of the day, or something like that. I have two more Imperial bowls in exactly the same color. Okay? So whether it was a mistake or not, they made a run with that very light aquamarine color to it. Now, my feeling is that this was probably done, sold as a blank to a secondary decorating company, because if you look at the details of this, this actually has a band of gold leaf that was applied to the top surface. On that gold leaf was a decal was applied to that. And then after the decal was applied and dried, they put the gold paint as accents. You know, on here, they put a gold band on both sides of the gold leaf and on the handle. So that took a lot of decorating effort to get the designs and the decorations done on that one. This other one, likewise, I don't think, you know, Imperial did a lot of cutting, but they didn't do that much etching on theirs. And this is one that was acid etched. Then a green enamel was applied to the places that were etched out. Again, a gold leaf was applied to the undersurface to accent those flowers. So you can see the gold leaf. And then there was gold paint decorations added to the front. And one more thing. Does anybody notice what's on the handle? The same acid etched floral design is on the top of the shovel handle in there. It's not in green, but it's there in there. So again, the decorators went to town on that one. Now I've always wondered, these are such spectacular pieces, we ought to have these in a catalog somewhere. But we still don't know the numbers of these. We usually just simply call them the Candlestick Trays. Virtually everyone that I've seen has been rolled up in like a fruit tray with this, but they've got a candle holder in the top, the two sort of Grecian handles on that, which is a fairly common design with Imperial. This is one that occasionally will show up in wisteria. So you'll see it in the wisteria color. Again, here's the blue ice, the smoke. And the other common one is the iris ice. And what's interesting, the iris ice will often have a little bit of marigold accent on the ends of it. So that it appears that they may have used two dopes on it in order to get that sort of marigold effect. Okay? Any questions? Here's the deal, folks. My voice is about to give out. I'm more than willing, once we're done here, if you want to see any of these cuttings up close and get a better look at them, ask me and I'll hand them to you and you can take a look at it. Remember, I'm one of those kinds of people that when it comes to stretch glass, you really sometimes have to look at it, feel it, get up close to it, and I don't want you to not have that chance if you want it. Okay? Thank you very much.